Immigrants pretend to be tourists to save their sick daughter, but a miracle changes everything at the border. Morelia, Michoacán, a city that wakes up to the song of birds and the constant roar of buses along its main avenues. It was 6:15 in the morning when Lucia carried her daughter Emiliana in her arms and slowly descended the steps of the small apartment they rented in the Ventura Puente neighborhood. Her eyes were puffy from silently crying through the night. Javier, her husband, was already waiting downstairs with the engine of their old Tsuru running, staring off into the distance. Their daughter, barely 4 years old, lay limply against her mother's chest. She was so light that she seemed to weigh no more than a sigh. Her pale skin contrasted with her straight black hair, which fell in wisps over her face. Emiliana hadn't been talking much lately. She'd lost her appetite, tired easily, and her heart beat irregularly. What used to be laughter and play had turned into labored breathing and endless naps, but it wasn't until she fainted twice in the same week that Lucia, desperate, demanded a deeper evaluation at the civil hospital. If you're enjoying compelling stories like this one, make sure to give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our content. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. During the drive, Javier didn't say a word. His jaw was clenched. He kept both hands on the wheel as though each turn could be their last. There was no traffic yet. The sun was just beginning to tint the buildings orange. The air was cool, but inside the car, tension hung thick. Lucia softly stroked her daughter's hair, as if each gentle touch might ward off the disaster they already feared. They arrived at the hospital at 6:42. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor and sat in the pediatric cardiology waiting room. Other families were there, a mother with a child in a wheelchair, a single dad with twin girls asleep on his lap, an elderly woman praying quietly before an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The silence felt almost sacred. Everyone knew that the news on this floor was rarely good. Emiliana was breathing heavily. Lucia took off her sweater and wrapped it around her, worried about her temperature. Javier paced back and forth, stopping to check if his daughter's name had appeared on the display board for her turn. At 8:25, they were finally called. Family Gutierrez Perez, consultation room 3. A dry voice announced from the reception desk. The cardiologist waited for them, seated at a desk with a screen full of charts and test results. He was about 50, with a face lined by many years of practice. His white coat looked crisp, and his expression was serious but not arrogant. He greeted them with a slight nod, invited them to sit, and took Emiliana's medical files in steady hands. Lucia clutched her daughter more tightly. The girl was asleep on her lap. Javier felt his stomach twist. The doctor's silence stretched out longer than usual. "Mr. and Mrs.," he began, not lifting his eyes from the file. "This diagnosis is hard to deliver, but it must be done." The parents looked at each other, as though searching for strength in one another to face what they were about to hear. "Emiliana has a serious congenital heart defect. Her heart isn't functioning as it should. There is a structural malformation that requires open-heart surgery." Lucia held her breath. "How urgent is it?" Javier asked, his voice tight. The doctor finally looked up. His eyes were those of someone who has witnessed too many tragedies. "She doesn't have weeks. She has days, maybe less. The surgery must be done immediately or your daughter won't make it." Javier swallowed hard. Lucia began to cry silently. The doctor continued, more slowly now, as if wanting each word to sink in. "In the public healthcare system, the waiting list for this type of procedure is at least 6 months. It's impossible to schedule it earlier. There's no operating room, no supplies, not enough specialists. And in private clinics, we're talking about 500,000 to 600,000 pesos just for the operation. After that comes recovery, medications, follow-up." Lucia broke down in tears. She tried to speak, but the words drowned in her sobs. "Isn't there some kind of program or foundation?" Javier insisted, desperation in his voice. "There are organizations, yes, but there are also waiting lists, paperwork, procedures. And time, Mr. Gutierrez, time is not on your side." They left the consultation in a daze. Javier led the way, eyes fixed on the ground. Lucia walked slowly, cradling Emiliana as if she could shield her from the world. Outside the hospital, the three of them sat on a bench. The sun was now high, and the city noise was ramping up. But they heard nothing, only the sound of despair. "We can't let her die," Lucia whispered. Her voice choked with tears. "We won't," Javier replied almost automatically. "Then what, Javier? What are we supposed to do?" He looked at her for the first time since they left the doctor's office. And then he said it, as if the decision had been made in his mind before they'd even gone in. "We're going to the United States." "What? They have doctors there, hospitals, aid programs, something. We can't wait. We'll apply for a tourist visa. We'll say we're going on vacation. We'll take the risk. It doesn't matter. But we're not going to let her die here, Lucia. No!" Lucia looked at him, horrified. But she didn't argue. She didn't call it crazy. Because when your daughter's life is on the line, you cling to anything. Even crossing a border with a sick child in your arms. Even walking into a country that isn't waiting for you. That night, they sold Javier's cell phone. The next day, they started asking around for loans, pawning the little they owned. They contacted a distant aunt in Tijuana who might offer them a place to stay for a night. They printed documents, filled out forms, took photos for the visas. And throughout it all, Emiliana slept more than usual, ate less, and barely smiled. Time ticked on, and their daughter's heart, weakened with every passing second. Hours became the enemy. Each sunrise marked a silent countdown, a cruel reminder that Emiliana's heart couldn't wait. Driven by terror and a fierce love only desperate parents can know, Javier and Lucia began the visa application process like it was the last lifeline before the abyss. They knew there wasn't time to apply for a medical visa. The requirements were extensive. The evidence required was complex, and the US government doesn't typically rush cases like theirs, so they took the only plausible path, lying. Javier applied for a tourist visa, weaving a simple but believable story. They wanted to visit parks, see San Diego, show the little girl the ocean. For the embassy interview, Javier went alone. Lucia stayed home caring for Emiliana, who looked frailer by the day. He wore his best shirt, rehearsed answers in front of the mirror, memorized every detail. Modest income, informal job, no plot holes in his story. Sitting before the consular officer, his hands sweated so much he feared the passport might slip right out of them. "What is the purpose of your trip to the United States?" the officer asked, eyes still on his computer. "To, see California. We want to visit parks. Rest for a few days." Javier's voice barely wavered, but his eyes hid the real reason, his daughter's life. The official finally looked up. Silence. A few seconds that felt like an eternity. "Your visa is approved," he said, expressionless. Javier didn't believe it at first. After leaving the embassy, he walked 2 blocks aimlessly before stopping in front of a grocery store. Only then did he lean against the wall and break down in tears. Not tears of joy. He cried from fear, from pressure, from guilt at having lied, and, above all, from relief. With the visa in hand, they bought the cheapest tickets they could find for Tijuana. They traveled with only the clothes they wore. A small backpack with some clothing, a folder of medical certificates translated into English by a friend, a bag of Emiliana's medications, and the little rag doll she clung to, even in her sleep. Exhausted, Lucia's eyes stayed glued on her daughter, while Javier kept looking at the clock as if that could stop the inevitable. The trip to Tijuana was long, 13 hours by bus with a sick child in their arms. Emiliana slept most of the way, and each time she woke, her voice sounded weaker. At one stop, Lucia tried giving her bread and milk, but the child took only one bite before vomiting. A fellow passenger handed them a mint candy and wished them luck, not realizing why. By the time they reached the border in the early hours of the fourth day, the desert cold bit down to the bone. Lucia wrapped herself in a thin sweater and covered Emiliana with a blanket a woman on the bus had lent them. They were crossing at San Isidro legally, but they couldn't hide the dread in their eyes. Tourists stood in line, frequent travelers, families with cameras and colorful backpacks, and then there was them, 3 people who didn't fit in, carrying on their skin the anguish of what lay unspoken. "Don't say a word," Javier whispered to Lucia as they approached the customs window. "I've practiced. I'll do the talking." The agent was about 30, likely of Latino heritage, but his gaze was impenetrable. He took their passports, scanned them, and looked at Emiliana, who was asleep in her mother's arms. "What's the purpose of your trip?" he asked in English. "Visit parks, see the city, family vacation," Javier answered, trying to sound natural. The agent studied them for a few moments. Emiliana's face was pale, her forehead sweaty. She looked like a broken doll. "First time in the U.S.?" he continued. "Yes, first time," Javier affirmed. Silence returned. The officer stamped their passports, handed back their documents, and with a nearly imperceptible nod, motioned for them to go. "Welcome!" They walked several feet without saying anything. Then, as they passed the final doorway, Lucia stopped. She looked at Javier, he looked back at her, and they embraced tightly. Like they'd just won a battle they had no idea how to finish. Emiliana was still asleep, but for the first time in days, her breathing sounded slightly calmer. They were on American soil, with no plan, no home, no assurances, but with hope still alive, still beating. They left the border behind, but the weight on Lucia and Javier's chests was only beginning to sink in. They'd taken a monumental step, perhaps the most perilous of their lives, and there was no turning back. This unknown country, with signs in a language they barely understood, was now their only chance. San Isidro awakened under a grey sky, heavy with clouds that threatened but never rained, making everything seem darker. They walked aimlessly down a dusty avenue, guided by the scrap of a map Javier had memorized on his phone before leaving Mexico. They had no phone signal, no data, and only a handful of dollars they'd changed at a money exchange on the Mexican side. Each step made Emiliana heavier in her mother's arms. Carrying her felt like carrying a silent, painful burden. "Where are we going to sleep?" Lucia asked softly, afraid to wake the child. Javier didn't answer. He scanned the area, looking for a bus station, a taxi, a friendly face, anything that might save them from being adrift. They were still wearing the same pants from 2 days earlier. The backpack hung from his shoulder, holding documents they guarded like gold. They found a small bus terminal. Javier approached a janitor, offering his best smile and halting English. "Excuse, please, we're bus to Riverside." The man gave him a wary look at first, then seemed to relent. He pointed to a ticket window and spoke words Javier only partly understood, but he gathered the gist. A bus would leave in under an hour. They spent some of their limited money on tickets. They guarded what remained carefully. They had no idea how long they would be there or what the coming days would bring. Lucia sat on a cold metal bench with Emiliana in her lap. The child was feverish, her face pale and ringed with dark circles. Lucia offered her some water, but Emiliana took only a small sip before drifting back to sleep. "Javier, if she dies on us here," Lucia said weakly, gazing down, out of tears. "That won't happen. It won't," he replied, but without conviction. The bus left on time. They boarded, sitting at the back without speaking. The route to Riverside was just over 2 hours, but it felt like forever. They passed through cities they didn't know, industrial areas, streets lined with signs and stores that felt like another planet. Lucia couldn't help but look at each person around them, hoping to find some glimmer of solace in their faces. Meanwhile, Javier pored over their documents. He had Emiliana's birth certificate, a doctor's letter in Spanish, a few medical reports riddled with technical terms he didn't understand, and a handwritten note from a friend who'd promised to search for hospitals in California. It was all they had, that and Emiliana's heart, fluttering like a leaf in autumn. Arriving in Riverside, the terminal was smaller than they'd expected. There were no taxis nearby, no open food stalls. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the city seemed frozen in a strange, almost hostile calm. The sun was setting, and with it came a drop in temperature. Lucia got off first, shivering. She walked a few steps to a bench and sat down, cradling Emiliana as though the child might slip away. Javier went to buy something from a vending machine, but it was out of order. He returned, frustrated, pockets empty and forehead creased with worry. "We have nowhere to go, Lucia. No one answered my messages. I don't know what we're going to do." She said nothing, just lowered her gaze and wept quietly. Emiliana stirred, opened her eyes slightly. Her lips were dry, her skin burning. Lucia stroked her forehead, desperate, and that's when it happened. A woman in her 70s, with neatly tied white hair and a hand-knit sweater, walked up slowly, carrying a reusable grocery bag with fruit and a bottle of water. She stopped in front of them, her gaze gentle. "Are you okay?" she asked in a soft voice. Lucia didn't fully understand, but the tone alone made her feel noticed. Javier rushed to respond, eyes pleading. "Please, my daughter is sick. Hospital. We have no place to stay." The woman's brow furrowed. She leaned down to look at Emiliana, who could barely keep her eyes open. Then she looked at Lucia, still crying silently, and at Javier's haunted expression. "Come, I'll help you." Javier hesitated briefly. Lucia watched him, unsure. "What if?" she murmured. "What if what? She's the only person who's spoken to us all day." They agreed. They walked a few blocks with her. Her house was modest but inviting. The porch was lined with potted plants, a wooden rocking chair, and a faded American flag. Inside, the smell of freshly baked bread and a sense of home washed over them, something they hadn't felt in days. "My name is Eleanor. You're safe now." Lucia couldn't catch every word, but her heart understood the gesture. Eleanor gave them hot food, water, and called a nearby community clinic. Meanwhile, she settled Emiliana on a sofa under a blanket, pulled out an old stethoscope from a drawer, and listened to her chest with surprising confidence. "You need a doctor. Fast." Night fell over Riverside, and inside that house, fear began to slowly morph into something else, something resembling hope. Though Eleanor wasn't a doctor, she'd lived long enough to recognize the desperation in a mother's eyes and the danger in a child's feverish skin. As Javier explained, stumbling through English, that Emiliana had a severe heart condition, that they had arrived just hours ago from Mexico, and that they knew no one, Eleanor simply nodded and stood up. She didn't ask why they'd lied to get into the country, didn't judge their accents or question their intentions. She saw only a family in need of help, period. "We'll go to the community clinic, it's not far," she said firmly, searching for her car keys. Her sedan was old, but clean and well-maintained. Lucia sat in the back, still holding Emiliana, who lay wrapped in the borrowed blanket. Javier settled into the passenger seat, anxious, unsure if he was doing the right thing. Every minute felt like they were crossing another invisible line between right and wrong, but they'd already crossed so many that one more hardly mattered. On the way, Eleanor was on the phone, calling a nurse friend. She explained the situation, insisting they be seen even without insurance or papers. Her tone was gentle yet unyielding, like a grandmother who won't take no for an answer when a child's life is on the line. They arrived at the community clinic. where the staff looked surprised to see them so late, 10:30 p.m. The urgent care services were limited, but the mother's silent tears, Emiliana's fragile condition, and Eleanor's determined presence did the talking. A young doctor of Latin American descent came out to greet them. "What's wrong with the girl?" she asked in Spanish, seeing the desperation on their faces. Javier, on the brink of collapse, pulled the medical documents from his backpack. The doctor read them quickly, frowning. "This is serious. She needs a children's hospital. Specialized care. We can stabilize her here, but that's it." "Are you going to report us?" Javier asked, terrified. "No, nobody calls immigration here. We help," she answered firmly. That night, as Emiliana received IV fluids and supplemental oxygen in a small emergency room, Lucia never let go of her hand. Not for a second. She feared that if she did, even for a moment, her daughter might slip away entirely. Javier, exhausted and silent, stood in a corner, staring blankly, grappling with the massive unknown before them. Eleanor stayed too, sitting in a plastic chair by their side as if this were her own family. At one point, she pulled an old photograph from her purse and showed it to Lucia. It was a blonde girl of about 6, wearing pigtails and a floral dress. "My granddaughter, Sophie. She passed away 5 years ago. Heart problem. Like Emiliana," she said, tenderly touching the picture. Lucia needed no translation. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. They didn't know why this woman had come into their lives at this precise moment, but they dared not question it. Eleanor had lost a granddaughter. Now, maybe without realizing it, she was trying to save another. By morning, the doctor explained that there was a children's hospital in the city with a program for uninsured kids. Gaining acceptance wouldn't be easy. There were protocols, requirements, and red tape, but if someone at the hospital could formally initiate a referral for Emiliana, she might be put on a waiting list. A list that, if they were lucky, wouldn't be as long as in Mexico. But, the doctor added seriously, the biggest hurdle isn't medical, it's legal. Without proper immigration status, there's a good chance they won't accept her into the program. Sometimes they won't even let you register. Silence filled the room. "Then what was the point of all this?" Javier muttered, feeling defeated. "It's not over. Not yet," Eleanor said, standing up decisively. They left the clinic with a referral sheet and an appointment for the following day at Riverside Children's Hospital. Eleanor drove them back to her home. She offered to let them stay. Javier wanted to refuse out of pride, but when Lucia looked at him with pleading eyes, he relented. "Just a few days, please," he murmured. Eleanor nodded and showed them an empty room on the second floor. It had a simple bed, an old crib in one corner, and a window facing the backyard. Not luxurious, but to them it felt like a palace. That night, as Emiliana slept deeply under medication, Lucia gently stroked her hair with the same care as always, but with renewed strength in her heart. Javier, sitting on the bed's edge, held his daughter's hand without speaking, and from the hallway, Eleanor watched, her eyes wet, as if she, too, needed something in that scene to be healed. They didn't know what would happen the next day, nor how they'd navigate the legal maze, the immigration suspicion, and the fortress-like system. But in that moment, for the first time since leaving Morelia, they allowed themselves one thing: hope. The next morning came sooner than expected. The night had been restless. Though Emiliana slept several hours, her breathing was still weak. Her complexion still had that grayish tone that made Lucia's heart clench every time she looked at her. Even so, there was something different in Eleanor's home. Maybe not quite peace, but a hint of relief. By 7, Eleanor was already up. She had coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs ready, though Lucia couldn't bring herself to eat from nerves. Javier, on the other hand, ate in silence, knowing he'd need the energy for what lay ahead. Riverside Children's Hospital was no ordinary place. One of Southern California's most respected medical centers for complex pediatric cardiology. and possibly Emiliana's only real chance. They left in Eleanor's car. Emiliana, awake but frail, sat on her mother's lap. They brought the community clinic referral, the original medical records from Morelia, and a printed copy of a letter Eleanor herself had written in English, stating that the family was temporarily staying at her home. From afar, the hospital was impressive, a modern structure of blue-tinted glass and immaculate gardens, with children's murals on the walls, animal sculptures at the entrance, and a spacious reception area filled with colorful toy boxes. But neither Lucia nor Javier felt reassured. They knew that beneath the friendly facade lay bureaucracy, protocols, and gates that might not open for them. At reception, a social worker greeted them. She was a young woman with an American accent, but clearly Latino features. Her name was Carla, and she spoke fluent Spanish. "So, you have no medical insurance, no medical visa, no residency?" she asked gently, reviewing their paperwork. Javier nodded. Lucia looked down, clutching Emiliana, who was resting on her chest. Carla sighed, then turned to Eleanor. "You say they're staying with you in your home?" "Yes. They have no one else here. They're only here for the child. There is a special program called Child's Heart Hope. It's for extreme cases with no coverage. But they only accept minors with some form of ongoing immigration paperwork or medical sponsorship, and they need someone legally responsible if the parents don't have status." Silence fell like a hammer. Javier took Lucia's hand. She pressed her lips together, feeling the little they had accomplished slipping away again. "I can sign as a temporary legal guardian," Eleanor declared firmly. "If it helps to get her evaluated, I'll do it. And if I have to talk to the program director, I will." Carla looked surprised. It wasn't common for an American citizen to step in like this for a family she'd just met. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I am. I won't lose her again." Nobody asked what she meant by again. But Lucia understood. Eleanor had a past grief, pushing her to do what no stranger had done for them before. Carla left the cubicle and returned 10 minutes later with a doctor, a woman in her 40s, wearing a white coat, with a kind face and eyes that held something rarely seen in these cases: compassion. "I'm Dr. Valeria Sanchez. They told me about your situation. I can't promise anything yet, but I'll examine Emiliana. If her diagnosis matches the records you brought, I'll personally submit her case to the program committee." Lucia burst into tears. Javier thanked her in a voice barely audible. Eleanor simply watched, eyes red. Emiliana was taken to a small exam room. Lucia went with her, still drowsy. The child let them examine her without fuss. The doctor listened to her heart and asked a few simple questions, then ordered an immediate echocardiogram. Over the next 3 hours, Emiliana underwent specialized tests. Finally, Dr. Valeria came out, results in hand. It's a complex case, but it's treatable. "The surgery is urgent, but there's hope. If the committee accepts her into the program, we can operate in under 2 weeks." Lucia collapsed into Javier's arms. Eleanor exhaled, as if releasing a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "And if they don't accept her?" Javier asked, voice trembling. "I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. This child deserves to live. And for now, you're not alone." In the following hours, Dr. Valeria personally presented Emiliana's case to the Child's Heart Hope Committee, attaching the community clinic referral, Mexican medical records, and Eleanor's signed commitment as a temporary guardian. Meanwhile, Lucia and Javier waited in a small lounge, surrounded by other parents with the same fear, faith, exhaustion, and love etched on their faces. They waited until late afternoon. Carla returned with a small but genuine smile. "She's on the list. Emiliana has been accepted. She'll have priority because of how critical her condition is." Javier didn't believe it at first. Lucia covered her mouth with both hands, unable to make a sound. Eleanor stepped forward and hugged Lucia, as if she were her own daughter. They left the hospital after dark, walking slowly, as though the ground beneath them weren't real. Emiliana slept, oblivious, but inside her fragile chest, her heart kept beating, closer to a new chance at life. The next few days were like someone had pressed pause on their fears, but not on their uncertainty. Even though Emiliana was officially on the surgery list with priority status, the clock was still ticking, and every morning began with the same silent question. What if we run out of time? Dr. Valeria set up a strict protocol to keep Emiliana stable while they waited for surgery day. Twice a week, Lucia had to bring her to the children's hospital for oxygen checks and heart monitoring. The injections, medications, nighttime oxygen and liquid diet turned Eleanor's house into a sort of improvised ICU, but nobody complained. Javier left early each morning to find odd jobs, yard work, painting, even helping people move on weekends. He never asked how much he'd be paid, only for the chance to work. He did it for Emiliana, for Lucia, and to keep from going mad with worry. Staying still felt like inviting the fear to swallow him whole. Sometimes he came home dirty, with blistered hands and a sunburned neck, but carrying rice, bread, milk, little things that now felt like a win. Eleanor always had a hot meal waiting and a look that spoke louder than words. "Thank you," Javier would say every night. "Don't thank me, just keep fighting," she'd reply, voice gentle but firm. Lucia, meanwhile, had become nurse, mother, therapist, and emotional anchor all at once. She barely slept, ate poorly, but never left Emiliana's side. She memorized every item on the medical schedule, measured her daughter's fever with the palm of her hand, recognized changes in her breathing rhythm before any doctor did. That routine lasted 12 days, 12 days of anxious hope wrapped in fear. Then, 2 days before the scheduled surgery, disaster hit. It was Thursday morning. Lucia was making breakfast while Eleanor helped Emiliana brush her teeth. Javier had just stepped out to work at a house nearby. The front door stood ajar to let in some air. Everything seemed normal until the vans pulled up. 2 white vehicles with no logos parked in front of the house. 4 ICE agents, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, stepped out, wearing tactical gear and badges on chains. They pounded on the door. Lucia froze in place. Hearing the noise, Eleanor came downstairs. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. "We received an anonymous tip that a Mexican family is living here illegally. May we come in?" Eleanor hesitated for a second, tension showing on her face, but she refused to budge. "There's a sick child in here. She's supposed to have surgery in 2 days. What are you doing?" The agents didn't reply. One opened a folder, rifling through documents. He spoke in a flat tone. "We're here for the father, Javier Gutierrez Perez. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and activate notifications so you'll always know when we post new content." Just then, Javier returned, carrying a ladder over his shoulder. He saw the white vans and immediately grasped what was happening. He didn't run or shout. He just set the ladder down slowly and raised his hands. "That's me." "Do you have any ID?" they asked. "I don't, but my daughter, she has urgent surgery, please." They paid him no mind. They handcuffed him on the spot, right in front of the house, in front of Emiliana, who ran out, frightened, screaming, "Papa!" with all the strength in her tiny body. It was the first time in weeks she'd actually shouted, "Javier!" Lucia cried, rushing to Emiliana. "Don't move," one of the agents ordered, looking at her. Eleanor stepped in. "You're making a mistake. The girl is in treatment. You could kill her if you separate her from her father." The agents didn't argue. They took Javier away in minutes. Emiliana began hyperventilating in panic. Lucia scooped her up, both of them sobbing. Eleanor ran back inside, dialed Dr. Valeria's number, then a local refugee advocacy group, and finally a lawyer she hadn't spoken to in years. That night, The story reached the ears of a local radio reporter who covered immigration and human rights. It spread quickly through community groups, Facebook pages, and Latino radio stations. The headline was short but powerful: Mexican girl racing against time for a chance to live. Her father detained by ICE. Emiliana's heart still beat, but the countdown was accelerating. Faster than ever, darkness had fallen on Riverside, yet there was no rest in the air. Only a suffocating sense of despair. Javier had vanished behind the slamming doors of a white van. Lucia, holding Emiliana in her arms, found it impossible to breathe. The child was asleep now, exhausted by the emotional meltdown. Eleanor, usually so calm, paced back and forth, phone in hand, a mixture of anger, fear, and urgency burning in her eyes. "We have less than 48 hours, she told Lucia, gripping a cup of coffee she wouldn't drink. "The surgery's scheduled. If Javier doesn't come back before then, you can't sign the consent form alone. The hospital needs both parents or a guardian approved by a judge. And if they don't let him out, if they deport him," Lucia asked, voice ragged, "they won't deport him. Not if we create enough pressure." Eleanor had set in motion a network that had seemed dormant, but really just needed a spark. She called old friends at pro-immigrant NGOs, free legal clinics, supportive churches, and human rights activists. She even reached out to a college professor she'd once joined in protesting detention centers. Meanwhile, Emiliana's condition worsened. Her fever returned late that night. Trembling, Lucia carried her back to the children's hospital, where they admitted her for intensive observation. Lucia couldn't sign any major consent forms alone, but she was allowed to stay by her daughter's side. Dr. Valeria was outraged. "This can't be happening now," she whispered angrily, away from the nurses. "The operation's in less than 2 days. What kind of system tears a father away from his daughter on the brink of surgery?" That same night, Valeria penned an emergency medical report detailing Emiliana's critical status, attaching it to a request for a temporary stay of deportation. She submitted the documents to the federal court, along with letters signed by herself, Carla the social worker, and Eleanor. Meanwhile, at the detention center where Javier had been taken, the atmosphere was wholly different: cold, gray, silent. He shared a cell with 2 Honduran men who didn't quite understand why he was so distressed. When he told them about Emiliana, they fell quiet. One offered up his phone call time. Javier didn't call Lucia. He knew she wouldn't be able to answer. Instead, he called Eleanor. "How's Emiliana?" he asked, before even saying hello. "She's stable, for now. But if you're not released tomorrow, there won't be surgery. You think they'll let me go? I don't know. But hang on, don't lose your head." He hung up, eyes burning. Inside that concrete cell, his heart pounded not from fear of deportation, but from terror that he wouldn't see his daughter alive again. The following morning, social media lit up. Emiliana's story started appearing on Spanish-language radio stations and local news sites. A Facebook post by a volunteer from Eleanor's church went viral among immigrant communities. "Are we going to let a little girl die because her dad doesn't have papers? We can't stay silent." Dozens of messages began pouring in, people offering support, legal contacts, petitions, even money. A local radio station, La Voz del Pueblo, interviewed Eleanor Leve. She spoke in a trembling voice about the situation. A 4-year-old girl. She didn't come here to steal anything. She didn't come to cause harm. She just wants to live. And they're taking her father away right when she needs him most. At the same time, a lawyer assigned by the legal clinic filed an emergency habeas corpus petition before a circuit judge. A risky move, but a necessary one. Attached were letters from doctors, social workers, even a church representative who had visited the family once. That same day at the detention center, an officer approached Javier with a folder in hand. They're taking you to court. Today, you have a hearing at 3 o'clock. Javier had no idea if that was good or bad, but he nodded. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles and led to a van. He couldn't see the street, but he felt time slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Lucia refused to leave the hospital room. Emiliana lay surrounded by monitors, her fragile body wired up. A nurse told Lucia that, before falling asleep, the girl had asked, "Mama, did Papa leave because I'm sick?" That question broke her inside. At 3:30 p.m., the immigration judge took her seat, reading the documents in silence, brow furrowed. She scanned photos, medical notes, Eleanor's temporary guardian form, and the various testimonies. Then she looked up at Javier. "Do you have anything to say?" He stood, hands trembling. "I just want to be with my daughter. She has no one else. All she wants is a chance to live. I didn't come here to stay. I came to save her." The judge didn't answer right away. She took a breath, closed the folder, and delivered her decision. Temporary protective status is granted. Mr. Javier Gutierrez may remain in the country to accompany his daughter's medical treatment until further judicial notice. The case will be reviewed again after the operation. At first, Javier didn't grasp the meaning. Only when his attorney gave him a tearful smile did he feel his legs shake. That night, Javier returned to the house. Eleanor met him at the door, and they hugged wordlessly. Then he rushed to the hospital, dashed up the stairs as if his soul depended on it, and found Lucia dozing in a chair beside Emiliana. "I'm here, my love. I'm here now," he whispered, taking his daughter's hand. She barely opened her eyes and looked at him. "Papa, don't leave again. Never again, my little girl." With that, the worst seemed over, but the greatest test was yet to come, the operating room. Sunrise peeked through the windows of Riverside Children's Hospital. It was Friday, the day. The surgery was set for 8 a.m. Emiliana slept, connected to IVs, breathing irregularly but stable. She appeared calm, unaware of the emotional whirlwind engulfing those around her. Neither Lucia nor Javier had slept. They spent the night taking turns watching their daughter, as if staying awake could somehow shield her. Eleanor arrived before dawn, carrying a small suitcase of essentials for the coming days. She knew that after surgery, recovery would be lengthy, and they'd need to rotate shifts for resting, eating, simply living. Dr. Valeria arrived promptly, dressed in a fresh lab coat, face serious but eyes warm. She greeted the parents with a handshake and knelt to speak gently to Emiliana, as if to a niece. "Today you're going to take a little nap, but when you wake up, you'll feel much better. Sound good?" Emiliana, half asleep, nodded with a faint smile. Then she looked at her mom. "Will Dad be here?" "Yes, honey. Dad's not going anywhere," Lucia answered softly, as Javier stroked the little girl's hair, fighting back tears. A nurse arrived with a stretcher. Lucia bent down and kissed her daughter's forehead. Javier did the same. They watched her disappear down the hall, flanked by doctors and assistants. The sight of Emiliana on her back, clutching her rag doll against her chest, fading from view at the corridor's end, etched itself into their souls forever. And then the waiting began. In the second-floor waiting room, time felt heavier than lead. Eleanor tried to knit, her shaking hands producing a little pink cap, without knowing if Emiliana would ever wear it. Lucia said nothing. Javier paced, counting floor tiles, stopping every time a figure in a white coat passed by. Outside, the city went about its business, but within the hospital, their world was on pause. The local newspaper, the Riverside Tribune, ran a lengthy article. "The Border of the Heart. A Mexican girl fights to live while facing the U.S. immigration system." It included a photo of Emiliana asleep in Lucia's arms, taken by a hospital volunteer with Eleanor's permission. It mentioned Dr. Valeria's efforts, Eleanor's role as a temporary guardian, and the judge's order allowing Javier to remain in the country. That same day, various local churches collected donations for the family. NGOs offered free legal advice. Members of the local Latino community held a candlelight vigil in the park across from the hospital. Over 100 people came. None of them knew Emiliana personally, but they all understood what it means to fight for a child, to love beyond fear. Around noon, Dr. Valeria emerged into the waiting area. Lucia jumped to her feet, Javier right behind her. Eleanor dropped her knitting needles to the floor. The surgery was successful, Valeria announced, wearing a tired but triumphant smile. Her heart responded. We repaired the malformation. She needs time to recover, but Emiliana's out of danger. Lucia dropped to her knees, sobbing as though life had been returned to her. Javier embraced her from behind, speechless. Eleanor sank into a chair, eyes shut, breathing in relief. For a while, no one spoke. There was no need. Silence was the only language that mattered at that moment. Emiliana was moved to intensive care. For the first 24 hours, Lucia could only watch her through the glass. Javier alternated with her, overseeing every vital sign, every small improvement. 36 hours later, Emiliana opened her eyes. She was weak, but she smiled. She whispered, so softly they had to lean in. Where's my doll? Lucia laughed through tears and placed it in her arms. Emiliana hugged it as though it was all she needed to keep living. Legally, though, the family's trouble wasn't over. Javier's temporary stay had an expiration date. Their lawyer explained that they would have to fight for extended humanitarian protection. They could apply for medical asylum for Emiliana, but that involved paperwork, witnesses, hearings, nothing certain. That's when Eleanor quietly took another step forward. She went to family court and submitted an official request to become Emiliana's temporary legal guardian. As a USS citizen, she argued, she could secure the child's medical coverage, legal protection, and safety while the parent's immigration status was sorted out. I'm doing it because I love her like my granddaughter, she told the judge, and because this little girl needs a place where she won't be treated as illegal, but recognized for what she is, a precious life. The procedure wasn't quick, but the judge agreed to review it urgently. Meanwhile, he let Eleanor remain as Emiliana's legal representative for medical and schooling purposes. Compassion, an invisible force that knows no borders or documents, became this family's true safety net. It wasn't just doctors or lawyers, but countless anonymous faces bringing food, neighbors leaving cash in envelopes at the doorstep, nurses saying a prayer before stepping into Emiliana's room. When she was transferred to a general ward, the hospital staff held a small celebration, balloons, a signed card from everyone, and a box of brand new crayons. So you can keep coloring the world, a nurse said in Spanish. Emiliana, still frail, drew a heart flanked by 2 hands. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, she wrote, "Thank you." The power of compassion had achieved the impossible, but the road was still long. The days following surgery were a constant mix of fear, relief, and exhaustion. Lucia spent most of her time at Emiliana's bedside, reading stories she could barely finish without her voice cracking. Sometimes she'd drift off in the chair, head resting on the mattress, one hand on her daughter's arm, terrified that if she woke, everything might have been a dream. But it wasn't. Emiliana's small, fragile body began showing signs of recovery. Her cheeks regained some color, her once dull eyes opened more often. Then one afternoon, unexpectedly, she smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Mama, am I better now?" she asked softly. Lucia couldn't speak. She hugged her, crying, nodding again and again. "Yes, my love, you're getting better." Javier walked in just then, carrying a handful of wildflowers he'd gathered on the way back from work. His arms were streaked with dirt, his shirt faded, but his eyes shone with pride. "Look who's back," he said, showing her the flowers. I brought them for you because you came back to us, too." Emiliana held them in shaky hands and sniffed. "They smell like heaven." Over the next few weeks, her recovery was slow but steady. The children's hospital allowed Lucia and Javier to stay in the room, thanks to the judge's temporary permissions. The nurses adored Emiliana. Some brought her books, others sketches by their own kids. Everyone knew her story. One morning, upon waking, Emiliana asked for paper and pencil. Javier offered the small notebook where he'd been tracking her medication schedule. She wrote in big, shaky letters, "I want to run." "And you will, my girl," he said, brushing back her hair. "You'll run all over this hospital and no one will stop you." 32 days after the surgery, Emiliana was discharged. She left in a wheelchair, wearing a pink coat a social worker had given her, still clutching her rag doll. Outside, Eleanor was waiting, tears in her eyes, along with several neighbors from the local church. They applauded. Some sang, some simply wept. Returning to Eleanor's house felt like returning to sacred ground. The bedroom where they once cowered in fear was now a place of hope. Lucia decorated the window with paper flowers Emiliana made in the afternoons. Javier built a little wooden desk where she could draw Eleanor, now nicknamed My Miracle Grandma by Emiliana, basked in the child's laughter echoing in her home. Yet the legal battle continued. Javier's temporary status remained in effect, but only until a set date. The judge demanded an official medical evaluation confirming Emiliana's health and proof the family was contributing to the community. Without that, they could be summoned back to court, facing possible deportation. Then something unexpected happened. Javier's landscaping boss, Thomas, an American citizen, appeared in immigration court with a reference letter. In it, he praised Javier's reliability and work ethic, stating that the team respected him. Thomas offered Javier a formal work contract, complete with a temporary social security number, backed by an NGO that facilitated humanitarian work permits in special cases. "He's not just a gardener, he's a father who gave everything for his child. Now he deserves a chance to stay and live in peace," Thomas told the judge in a preliminary hearing. The impact was immediate. The judge extended Javier's protection for another 6 months, allowing him to work legally and letting Emiliana continue her follow-up care without interruption. Lucia, still without a work permit, started volunteering at one of the organizations that had helped them, looking after children while their parents attended English classes or lawyer meetings. The entire family began planting roots in a foreign land that no longer felt hostile. One spring afternoon, Emiliana ran around Eleanor's backyard, chasing a cloth ball. Lucia watched from the window, smiling in a way she hadn't in months. Javier sat on the steps, eyes full of gratitude. "Did you see her laughing?" he said. "She's laughing, Lucia, and she's not clutching her heart when she gets tired," Lucia replied. "It doesn't hurt her anymore." "You know what I think?" Javier said, still watching his daughter. "That heart doesn't beat just for her now. It beats for all of us." Eleanor came out with a glass of lemonade and sat beside them. "Do you realize how far you've come?" Lucia gently squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Thank you for never letting go of us. I never realized I needed a second chance until you arrived," Eleanor replied, her gaze warm. Emiliana's heart, now stronger, no longer just beat with life. It beat with a future. A year later, Riverside streets looked the same park with worn-out swings, the same grocery store with blue signs, the same broad sky quietly watching over everyone. But inside a modest house with a porch rocking chair and hanging flower pots, everything had changed forever. In the backyard, Emiliana dashed around wearing a flower crown, laughing as she blew soap bubbles into the air. Her hair, thicker and healthier now, fluttered in the breeze as if celebrating her newfound freedom. No more oxygen tubes, no more shadows in her eyes. Her heart beat strongly, as though it knew it had triumphed over death. From the kitchen, Lucia watched, drying her hands on a towel. She was preparing enchiladas for the community lunch she and other volunteer mothers held every Sunday. Eleanor helped with the ingredients, laughing with a new lightness in her expression. She had become more than a host. She was family, a grandmother by destiny, by choice. "Remember when you didn't even know what a real tortilla was?" Lucia teased. "And now I make them better than you," Eleanor shot back, arching an eyebrow playfully. "Keep dreaming," Lucia retorted, laughing. In the living room, Javier studied an English workbook while glancing over some paperwork from his job. His immigration status was still temporary, but he was well on his way to legalizing it thanks to a humanitarian visa sponsored by his employer and backed by the hospital. He had a formal contract, fair wages, and was up to date on taxes. He'd managed the impossible, building a decent life out of a tragedy. They had no luxuries, no absolute guarantees, but they had peace. And that was enough. Their immigration case remained open. Court hearings had been postponed multiple times, and the outcome was still uncertain. But now they had an army of supporters, doctors, lawyers, neighbors, and activists. Above all, they had a community that had embraced them. That Sunday, as every month, the neighborhood church held a small event in the local park. Emiliana was invited to speak. She was 5 years old and still struggled to read aloud, but she insisted. Standing atop a wooden box, ragdoll in her arms, she addressed about 40 people. "Hi, my name is Emiliana. Before, my heart was broken, but a lot of people took care of it, and now it beats strong. Thank you for saving me, and thank you for helping my parents." Applause erupted. Eleanor cried. Lucia hugged her from behind. Javier bowed his head, moved to his core. Afterward, a woman approached with a young boy. She had just arrived from Honduras. Fear filled her eyes. She spoke no English and carried a sick child in her arms, desperate for help. Lucia stepped forward without hesitation, taking the woman's hand. "You're not alone. We came here like that too. Come with me, I'll explain." Emiliana ran after them, as though she knew their story would be hers as well. That everything she had endured wasn't just for survival, it was so others could weather their storms too. That night, they all gathered for dinner at home. Lucia, Javier, Emiliana, and Eleanor. The TV was off. The table was set with simple dishes, made with love. "You know what I told that woman today?" Lucia asked. "What?" Javier responded. "That we didn't just cross a border, we crossed into another life." Javier looked at her, smiled, and raised his glass. "To Emiliana, the little girl who was born twice." Eleanor echoed his gesture, eyes bright. "And to the family who saved my soul when I least expected it." They toasted, and for that moment, the world stopped just for them. A silent victory without cameras or fireworks, but still eternal. Outside, Emiliana played in the yard. They could hear her laughter from the kitchen. Her heart kept beating, strong, free, alive. If you enjoyed this story, you're sure to love the next one that appears on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Until next time.